everyone, welcome to another Albums That Made Me. So I've been very much looking forward to doing this one as part of the series, Nighttime by Killing Joke. So as always, I'm just going to go through and with the sort of aid memoirs that I have up here, try and just remember certain things about getting into the band and my sort of progression through the albums. So this was not the first album by the band that I bought, but it was really from this point that I sort of fully embraced the album. And this was also the first time I saw them on tour. Now, I've seen Killing Joke 3 times now on the tour for this. So I'm consulting my old gig book here. And this would have been way back on the 6th of February 85. So actually before the album came out. So they were promoting that album on the tour. But in a lot of cases, this often would be quite exciting at that time where the album actually wouldn't be out at the time that I saw the band. That happened both with Killing Joke and also with Sisters of Mercy, actually. And there's probably a few other bands where that was the case. So yeah, 6th of Feb 1985. Support was a band called Ellery Bop. I think they were like a very twangy, I wouldn't quite say they were psychobilly, but they very sort of twangy alternative rock group. Yeah, that's what I really remember at the time, because I was obviously fixated on seeing this band. We'll have a look at the set listing in a moment for that gig, because it's pretty interesting what they were playing. Yeah, but that was my first proper sort of introduction to the band. But as I said, not the first album I listened to. So let's just go back a little bit. Look at their discography. This is probably the most helpful way for me to think about it. So around 81 to 83, I was in full-time employment, but the setup was that one day a week and one evening we were sent to college, and I was studying chemistry at that point, ONC chemistry, because I was working in a prep lab. And from 81 to 83, I basically did 2 years of ONC chemistry at Crawley College. And sometime in those 2 years, when I was over there, there was one person that really stuck out to me, and I really admired their style. And it was this punk guy, and he had the full Mohican. But what was more impressive is that he had, I can't remember if it was either a cut-off or a full denim jacket, but I was more interested in what was on the back. He had on the back, either him or someone else, had meticulously painted the Killing Joke Joker. I think it was the one from Empire Song, because I remember getting the t-shirt a little whiles after. This style of the Killing Joke Joker painted on the back. I couldn't quite work out what the paints was. I really never really plucked up courage at that point to go up and say to him, yeah, that's a really impressive piece of artwork. How did you do it? But I would have loved to have known, because it looked like the original article, but it wasn't like a sew-on patch. It was definitely painted on. And so before I bought the t-shirt, I went and bought this album. And I must admit, at the time, if I think back to 82 and what else I was listening to, so for me, this was the tail end of, 82 into 83 was the tail end of Nwubum, and from like 83 into 84, I was starting to listen to more sort of post-punk bands, and a lot of the stuff like Big Country, those sort of bands. So more of the sort of alternative, so more guitar orientated bands that weren't specifically hard rock or metal bands. So I remember listening to this at the time, and it was quite a a jarring album to listen to, and because I just didn't really have a point of reference. And I've still, when I could finally get through to going through my vinyl collection, I'll pull this out because I have this in vinyl. And yeah, it's quite dirgy. And I notice here we've got an reference to industrial rock, and I do know that often when talking about industrial rock in a wider capacity, Killing Joke are often name checked by a number of bands because they had a certain industrial feel and certain key albums in their career, some more than others. They always had this sort of post-punk main framework, I suppose, and then off that you had gothic rock, industrial rock, and those would ebb and flow on different albums, and then some albums got even more sort of metallic and pretty heavy, some of the later ones. So yeah, this was my step on album, but this was the album that really sort of drew me into the fold, and then the subsequent gig I went to. Now if I just go back to this, so yeah, basically what happened was I went to see them live here, and then as a result of me also watching them on the Tube TV show and just playing this stuff, my middle brother got into them, and we then, between us, I think, started to sort of go back. So I remember him buying, I think, Fire Dances, and then I kept up sort of buying this one and then this one, and there was a copy of this in the house at some point. Pandemonium at this point, I didn't have a lot of disposable income, so I remember just buying one of the singles off of this, which would have been Pandemonium. CD single. Skipped over Democracy completely, and then this came out. Bought this when it came out, and then subsequently after that bought this, and then really everything from 2010 onwards I listened to through streaming services. Now I was also lucky enough to go and see them in 2008, and we'll get onto that in a moment. So yeah, the first live gig I went to was 1985, and this was the set list. So a lot of stuff off of obviously Nighttime, quite a bit of stuff off the first album, with I think at least one of their singles thrown in. I don't know if I got Requiem on here as well. Sort of really old classic stuff, and then a lot of the new album. Now then I was lucky enough to see them in a back-to-back gig they did at the Forum in London in 2008. So this was the year before I then emigrated to Nova Scotia. So I finally went over to Canada end of 2009. So this was the previous year. And this was a really cool back-to-back gig, and I got tickets for it. My middle brother came over as well from where he was living, and we went to see them both nights. And so the first night was basically the first album with 80s, followed by second album, and it was the original lineup of Killing Joke. So when I saw them the first time, for Nighttime, the lineup would have been Jazz Coleman, Kevin Geordie Walker, sadly no longer with us, Paul Raven, who also sadly passed away quite a number of years ago actually. In fact, before I went to see them in London in 2008, I think he'd recently passed away. And then Paul Ferguson. That's when I saw them. If you go back to the original lineup, so let me just jump in. Where are we? Try and get here as quickly as possible, which is not always easy. Okay, so here we go. There we go. Jazz Coleman, Geordie Walker, Martin Youth Glover, So when I saw them in London 2008, this was the lineup. So the sort of classic lineup had reformed, the old lineup, and yeah, so it was cool to hear them play, those two albums, and then a few bits and pieces here and there. So Love Like Blood, 80s, off of Nighttime, interestingly enough, and also mixed in amongst the album stuff, the other tracks from early on in their career, like singles from early on in their career. Second night was really interesting. So they played some stuff from the first night, like Love Like Blood, 80s got played, and then a few others. So you'll notice they also played things like War Dance, The Weight. So there was sort of old stuff but other stuff all sort of peppered in. So there was things like Asteroid, which was from that album. So and Time Wave. So there was some nice stuff in there that would have been from albums just before. So was there anything from Hosannas from the Basement of Hell? Did I see anything there? I don't know if there was, funnily enough. Tribal Antidote, Hosannas from the Basement of Hell, Invocation, Implosion, Majestic. No, I don't think so, unless I'm missing something. But it looks like definitely what the album before that. Nope, what am I saying? Yeah, there was a track off of Pandemonium they played as well, which is cool. Here we go. This has got Asteroid on it, So pretty interesting 2 nights. So, classic old stuff with a couple of tracks off of Nighttime, and those I think were done in dedication to Paul Raven, and then second night all over the map really. Oh, There's Money's Not Our God. That was from, what's that from? Wow, now that one, did that come from this album? I think it did. So they were really peppered with lots of stuff. Now for that album, I'm trying to remember who played on that. Oh, it was Martin Atkins actually played on that one. So that was second night was pretty interesting, but first night was cool if you like the really classic stuff. So let's just see what other bands I get minded of when I run my various little programs here, and see which ones I went down a particular rabbit hole. So really, as a result, I suppose, of me listening to Killing Joke, first thing it did, it just made me want to listen to more Killing Joke, which with several bands happened. And at that point, I had a number of other bands I was listening to, so there was a bit of cross-pollination. So I was listening to Sister Mercy. I got interested in listening to The Cure again. So it's interesting when I do a query against the Gemini gets similar. If I do a Gemini get similar prompt, what comes up? So we have Ministry, who I didn't listen to until that's around the time of the track like New World Order. Same with Godflesh, probably around about 90, not till 98. Swans not till 98. And that was really more through reading Terrorizer magazine and A Natural Progression from Killing Joke. And Ministry was just me happening to walk into an Our Price or a Virgin Megastore, and they were playing New World Order off of the albums whose name I forget at the moment. Prong, not until a lot later. Frontline Assembly I listened to around sometime in the mid to late 90s. Same with bands like Die Corrupt. So I think at that point I had like an industrial metal sampler, which actually, funnily enough, had a one track on there by Killing Joke from around about the same period as Money Is Not Our God. Amoebics, it's interesting that band comes up. So they're more of a crust punk band, and I finally got around to listening to them sometime in the early 2000s, and then Fields in the Film really as a result of listening to Sisters of Mercy. So yeah, a few names come up there. Again, Ministry, Cabaret Voltaire. When did I listen to them? Probably not until a lot later. Yeah, I think with them it was sometime in the mid to late 80s. Sisters of Mercy, Psychedelic Furs. I did go and see them live sometime in the mid 90s. New Model Army. Yeah, I got into them around about the time of No Rest for the Wicked. Oh, good old Peter Murphy from Bauhaus. Banshees. I went to see them live just before Tinderbox was released, so quite late on in their career till I saw them live. They were really good actually live. I haven't really listened to much Pitch Shifter, so it's interesting when I do these searches on both Last FM. It is interesting. I'm getting quite an interesting industrial bent going on here. So let's do some genre history stuff using some prompt rappers I've got. So with post-punk, and what I did here is basically just looked up the genres here using my genre history prompt wrapper. Going through Gemini online. This is not a local Gemma. This is actual full-blown Gemini, but through the API. And we've got all the classics here. See, I would probably say that it was really as a result of me listening to stuff in '85, along with Killing Joke and all the bands I went to see around that time as well. So like Stranglers, Alarm, Sisters of Mercy, The Cult, The Damned, The Cure, Banshees, The Cult again. That then made me sort of go back and look at earlier stuff. So around that time, listening to New Order, so inevitable that I would sort of revisit Joy Division. Bauhaus, I'd already been listening to them quite a lot in the early 80s actually. We used to get out some tapes from the local video store which had various Bauhaus videos on, and there's a live gig as well, a really good live gig that was out on video at that time. Wire I didn't really listen to until a lot later. Public Image Limited, I have at least one album by them. The Fall, I'm trying to think what album I have by them, but no, I didn't get into them until a lot later. Interesting. What else names come up when we take a slightly different evolutionary approach? And we've got bands like MC5. So yeah, again, it's interesting, isn't it? It was, for me, although I'm of an age where I can actually remember some of these bands when they're actually out for the first time when the albums came out. In most cases, my appreciation all happened retrospectively post around about 85. So that led me backwards, I think. I'm trying to think of anybody here. Probably the only... Could I say that maybe I was listening to a bit of Roxy music before then? Possibly. Possibly. I'm just trying to think. Yeah. I don't know if Japan are going to come up, I doubt it, but certainly I was into them before 85. Yeah, but loads of bands here that are like proto, post-punk, into post-punk. And then, yeah, again, yeah, most of these are all retrospective listens. So definitely listening to a lot of post-punk that came out around 85 when it came out. And then everything else, it was retrospectively a lot of it. I had already been listening to things like Television, I think, prior to this as well. Now, I did also do a bit of a search on Gothic rock. And, yeah, like these bands here, either earlier or all around about the same time. Oh, and The Mission. And then other bands like Clan of X-Mox, Typo Negative, not until quite a little bit later. Yeah, maybe the late 90s into the 2000s, probably. I was trying to think when I listened to the Nico, but it would have been with Velvet Underground. Yeah, probably sometime, I don't know, maybe in the 2000s, quite late actually. I'd heard individual tracks. Oh yeah, Cradle of Filth, 98. So we're getting into a quite extreme, sort of gothic stroke black metal, I suppose, symphonic metal. What else here? Anything else springs to mind? It looks like we got The Usual Suspects. Did I accidentally? No, it is gothic rock. Okay. Oh, the Gun Club. Yeah, because Patricia Morrison from the Gun Club ended up in Sisters of Mercy for a period of time. A magazine. Yeah, with John McGeoch. Yeah, again, most of these probably from 85 going backwards. Yeah, sometime in the 2000s I had a bit of a real big Susie and the Banshees revisit and started sort of buying up some of their earlier albums on CD. And The Cure, I'd been slowly acquiring Cure albums over a period of time since about 81, I think. Because I've probably told this story where when my first job, same place I would have been at when I went to see Killing Joke for the first time, actually. And when I got into them, there was a guy I worked with who worked in a different department than me, and he was friends with some of the members of The Cure. So yeah, I remember we always used to listen to them in the car when sometimes I'd be standing waiting to catch the bus to go to the evening class over at Crawley College, and he'd sort of pick me up if he saw me on the way through, and we'd have a chat about music and listen to either The Cure or Thin Lizzy. Interesting mix there. Oh yeah, the usual list here of suspects. Yeah, but for me, yeah, fantastic gateway band. Over time, it took me down lots of various rabbit holes in terms of post-punk, gothic rock, industrial music. And I think I may have said this earlier, I actually quite like this period in their career, even stuff like Outside the Gates, even though it was completely different. This is a really interesting recording. It's a spoken word recording where Jazz Coleman's talking about the thinking behind Outside the Gates. and then we get into this period where they're much more industrial, heavier. And a lot of the really sort of heavy elements came to the fore, which is nice for me because by then I was already, into really super heavy stuff. So it was a nice progression for me. So there we have it. I hope you enjoyed that little bit of reminiscing on another episode of the albums that made me. Thanks once again for watching. Bye for now, and I'll catch you in a future episode.